Even though the Detroit Lions have been one of the most successful teams over the last couple of years, Lions fans are absolutely starting to grow impatient with this bargaining dealing that Brad Holmes has been doing and are absolutely almost to a point of demanding him to take urgent action. We're going to talk about it, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and 3 toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends, fans, and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. My friends, I'm going to tell you something. This is one of those episodes that it almost feels like now over the last couple of years, I've had to make in one facet or another. And I'll be honest, it's a really, really hard spot to be in. Because it's like on one side of the coin, you absolutely feel like, okay, we're just about there. We almost are there. We just need one more piece, one more thing to put us over the edge. And then you're like, man, why are we not doing this? Why is this not happening? And naturally you start trying to find somebody, something to look for to be the reason as to why something has not happened. But on the other hand, you have to step back and you have to say, okay, we're almost there. And what do I mean by we're almost there? We've almost gotten to our ultimate goal of getting to and winning a Super Bowl. But yet we haven't gotten there just yet. So you're at this point, you're at this fork in the road, you're at this junction where it's like, listen, are we a good team? Yes. In fact, we're more than a good team. We are a great team. We are a great organization. But we have not yet reached what we're looking for. We have not yet reached the mountaintop, so to speak. And that's where this episode really comes into a very interesting viewpoint. Because let's think about this. In 4 years, Brad Holmes, along with, Dan Campbell, Sheila, Chris Spielman, Mike Disner, Ray Agnew, John Dorsey, and a whole bunch of others, they have transformed the Detroit Lions into one of the most talent-rich and best-run organizations in the NFL. There's no debate on that. I don't care who the hell you are. And you can't argue with the crazy rise and how fast the Lions have done it, especially with the methodology that the Lions have used, which primarily has been through the draft. Because let's call it for what it is. The Lions have been, by and large, one of the most successful drafting teams over the last 4 years. I think the only team that you could probably say has had more success through the draft than us might be the Eagles. That's about it. So when you take a look at that, Brad Holmes has shown that his methodology to drafting has been absolutely damn near perfect. I can't say it is perfect because it's not, but it's damn near close. However, for all of the success that Holmes has had being a drafting GM, he is coming under fire once again, much like last season and even the one before that, for his failure to acquire top-end talent. Now, what am I talking about? I'm not talking about through the draft. I'm talking about through things like free agency and through the trade market. And for Lions fans, this has become a rather hot-button topic for them. It's become a rather sore spot, actually. Because for them, it's like, listen, we've seen what Brad Holmes can do through the draft. Nobody can debate that. But Lions fans, I can't even say all Lions fans. Let me clarify this. Some Lions fans have gotten to a point where they are just tired of this conservative, methodical, slow methodology that Brad Holmes has implemented. In essence, they're tired of the conservative methodology. They're wanting more of an aggressive push. They're wanting more of an urgent push to get things where they want it to be, which is right now. And that's why this episode is such a really tricky one. Because it's like, on one hand, you can't deny the fact that Brad Holmes has been a very, very central tenet, building block to why the Lions are successful. But yet, on the other hand, you also can't argue with the fact that there is some truth, there is some actual logic and reasoning into, we could be a little bit further if certain things were a little bit different. And that's why this episode is a really tricky one to do. But again, if there's one thing I've always done, I've never shied away from a challenge. And this is definitely a challenging episode. Because let's think about it. In Holmes' career as the Lions general manager, he has facilitated I would say at least 7 different trades for players. And those types of trades have had a ranking, if you will, of being really damn great to just absolutely terrible, abysmal. Such trades I'm thinking of are obviously Jared Goff, Michael Brockers, Trinity Benson, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Carlton Davis, Zadarius Smith, and Riley Patterson. Well, if you take a look at those 7 names that I just rattled off, I would say about a little over half of those trades have been at the very least solid to absolutely superb. Obviously, the best trade that Brad Holmes has ever facilitated was the very first one he ever pulled off, which was the Goff-Stafford trade, which brought Jared Goff to Detroit along with all the draft picks that we got. But other than that, I mean, most of the other trades for players that he's facilitated have been decent or solid, or as I've said, they've just not been very good. Because I would say the good trades that he's facilitated, Goff, obviously, Carlton Davis is another, Zadarius Smith, another, and Riley Patterson is like right there in the middle. Because it's like for the year that we got him from the trade, he was all right. And he was a decent kicker for us. Now, is he a Jake Bates? Hell no, he's not. But to say he was a terrible option is not true. He just doesn't have the range that, Bates does, which means Bates is a much better kicker. So, I would say about 4 out of the 7 trades that, Holmes has done have had some value to them. But other trades like Michael Brockers, Trinity Benson, Donovan Peoples-Jones, we just didn't get much out of them. In fact, we got virtually next to nothing out of them. They just were not good trades. So when you think about it from that, Brad Holmes has been okay when it comes to trading for players. But much like as I'm about to talk with the free agency concept of this episode, it's not about the trades per se that Brad Holmes has made. It's about the ones he's not made. It's about the ones he's not tried to make. Because that is where a lot of Lions fans, much like with the free agency part of this episode, have had issues with Brad Holmes, is because of the fact that there are players out there that the Lions faithful have been absolutely, virtually, almost if not damn begging Holmes to try and at least make an option of it. To try and at least see if if there's something there. And it's like, for all of these full-blown impassioned pleas, there have just been not a whole lot of, pieces of evidence that Brad Holmes has tried to make it work. And what am I specifically talking about? I'm specifically talking about adding more beef, more heat, more of a lethality threat, if you will, to the edge rushing department. And for a lot of Lions fans, they feel as if Brad Holmes is not pushing the envelope more than what he is, that he's being still too conservative with it. Because if you really think about it, the Lions have only facilitated one trade for an edge rusher, and that was Zadarius Smith this year. Now, I personally think Zadarius Smith did pretty good for us in the, pretty much like, 7, 8, 9 weeks that we had him. He pretty much got more sacks that he had with us than he had with the Browns prior to getting here. And he was able to bring some sort of a pass rushing element that was sorely lacking after we had lost Hutch. So at least in that consideration, I think Za'Darius has been rather good for us. But I also know this. For those fans that are quite frankly not happy about what Brad Holmes has not done, Za'Darius doesn't even come close to cutting the mustard. Why? Because they're wanting guys like a freaking J.J. Watt, a T.J. Watt, a freaking, Myles Garrett, and also Max Crosby. Those are the guys they're wanting. And for them, it's like every single time this conversation comes up, those are always like the first four names that most people are like, man, if Brad Holmes would just try and make a trade for those guys, just to see if they're available, and if we were to get our hands on them, we would completely flip the NFL on its ear. And don't get me wrong, we most certainly would. But here's the problem. Trades like that are hard as hell to freaking facilitate. You don't make mega trades like that just on a freaking whim and a prayer. It takes time, and it definitely takes compensation. But for Lions fans, that's not something they want to hear. They want to figure out and they want to hear how and what Brad Holmes is doing to try and facilitate those trades. Now, it's not just the trades, because yes, trades are much more difficult to try and pull off. So then naturally, the next area where a lot of Lions fans have issues with this conversation is especially in the free agency market. Because in the free agency market, now that the Lions have been successful and players want to come here to play for us, that means the Lions have already a massive upper hand and leg up on other teams than, anybody else in being able to bring top-end talent here. But yet, as we saw last offseason, even though there was a literal slew of different pass rushing specialists that the Lions could have at the very least tried to see about getting, it didn't happen. And that is where a lot of Lions fans, especially after how this year ended, they are I'm not even going to try and say a different word, they are very pissed with the fact of why Brad Holmes has not done more to fix or at least give more of a importance to this problem. Because if you go back to last year, everybody and their brother knew. They knew the Lions they had to do something to increase their pass rushing lethality. Because it's like, listen, for as damn good as Hutch is, he can't do everything by himself. And it's like, if you could just get someone to pair opposite of him, dude, you would have a freaking tandem that would just destroy offenses. And there were guys in free agency last year that a lot of Lions fans, some podcasters that I'm even friends with, like, Derek from Lions Syndicate, they were adamant, they were boisterous about Holmes making a move to go after some of these guys. Guys like freaking, Danielle Hunter, guys like Chase Young. They wanted those decisions to happen, but they didn't happen. In fact, what actually happened was Brad Holmes decided to go with a very, very, for lack of a better word, risky decision. And that was Marcus Davenport. And the risk wound up biting the Lions in the ass. We signed Marcus Davenport to what was it? I think a 1 year, $6-7 million contract. And the guy literally only played 2 games for us and was done. That was it. And that was quite literally one of the biggest things that a lot of people had with that decision. They're like, dude, you just spent $6-7 million on a guy who at his very best as an edge rusher has only had 9 sacks in a season. And that was when he was mostly healthy. He's never had a season where he's been primarily healthy. So for them, the fact that we went after a guy like Davenport, signed him, rather than a guy like a Hunter, a Chase Young, a Bryce Huff, or other guys like that, that was just absolutely just an anathema to them. But we have to understand something about Brad Holmes when it comes to this conversation about free agency. Just because Brad Holmes has not yet, made a push For a guy like that, like, a Chase Young, a Huff, a Daniil Hunter, anything like that, that doesn't mean Brad Holmes has not been a very good free agency GM either. Because take a look at some of the guys he's brought in through free agency that are either core tenets, core parts of our roster, or they have become integral pieces. Guys like Graham Glasgow, Alex Anzalone, Jake Bates, Brock Wright, David Montgomery, Kevin Zeitler. These are all guys that we picked up through free agency, and they have become integral parts of the team. Even if you're talking about Kevin Zeitler, who's only been here 1 year, or Jake Bates, who's been here 1 year, those guys had such an impact in just the 1 year they've been here that it's like, dude, trying to imagine replacing them would be rather difficult. Especially a guy like Zeitler, who was the best right guard in the NFL this year. Or a guy like Jake Bates, who has been the best kicker the Lions have had since we lost Matt Prater. Try imagining replacing those two guys would be absolutely ridiculous, especially with how much importance has been placed upon finding a consistent kicker. Especially with the premium that is placed upon the values of good offensive linemen. But like I said with the trades, for as, whatever good Brad Holmes has done in free agency with guys like I just mentioned, there's the other times where he's gone into free agency and either signed guys or re-signed our own players that were in the free agency period and handed out contracts that just absolutely wound up biting us in the ass. I just mentioned Marcus Davenport. How about Cameron Sutton, who we handed a 3-year, $33 million contract to, and he played 1 year for us and was absolutely terrible the majority of it? How about Romeo Okwara, one of the first major contracts that freaking, Brad Holmes ever handed out? We literally had him for, a couple of games, and he got injured after he signed that contract, and then virtually did nothing the rest of the time that we had him. In fact, he pretty much faded into oblivion. And then another guy, try and remember this name from the past, Tyrell Williams, signed him to be the major guy for a receiving corps in 2021, and we got maybe a couple of plays out of him before he had a concussion, and then we had to release him with an injury settlement. So again, there have been times where Brad Holmes has not made great decisions when it comes to free agency contracts. But again, it's not about the decisions that he has made as far as contracts. It's about the ones he's not made. Because when you take a look at the situation like I just talked about with this year, especially when we lost Hutch, especially when our defense started struggling to get after the passer, and we also had lost Davenport, the fact that Brad Holmes had not made more of an aggressive push to go out and get one of those guys when they were available, that to a lot of Lions fans was just absolutely unforgivable. Especially when you consider the fact of how we lost in the freaking, Commanders game in the divisional round. Freaking Jaden Daniels was sitting back there freaking, making pastrami sandwiches and really didn't have to worry too much about pressure. That's where a lot of this whole thing about the edge rushing thing has really reflared up. Is for them, they're like, listen, if we'd actually taken the time to invest way back in the offseason before this season started, maybe things would have been different. Who knows? But knowing the fact that we didn't do anything doesn't change the fact that we still lost against the Commanders. So for a lot of Lions fans, it's like, listen, that's where a lot of this, pent-up frustration, the freaking pointing of the finger at Holmes for not doing enough in this category is coming from. Which then brings me to this point at the very end of this episode. Is it fair? Is this criticism? Is this, attack, if you will, on Brad Holmes a fair one? Well, I'm going to tell you this right now. It's not a black and white issue. It's not 100% one way or the other. Here's how it is a fair criticism. Here's how it is a fair attack against what Brad Holmes has or has not done when it comes to this conversation. Here's how it's fair, and pardon me, my paper just got caught on something. If you think about it, Brad Holmes in the past has had multiple chances to acquire top-end, defensive talents, especially when it comes to the pass rushing element. But seldom has he actually done it. I mean, let's just call it for what it is. Out of the last 4 off seasons in which Brad Holmes has been the GM, either through the trade or the free agent market, in which now he's coming into his 5th one, the biggest free agent signing he has ever made as far as a defensive player of name recognition was DJ Reader. The biggest trade he has ever facilitated of the same like-mindedness is when we traded for Za'Darius this year. So think about it. It wasn't until this year that Brad Holmes truly, for lack of a better word or better phrase, stepped his toe out into that big pond and decided to say, okay, I need to go after some big-name guys. I need to bring in some top-end talent. Because otherwise, most of the time through the free agent and trade market, it was just finding depth pieces. It was just finding role players. Most of all of our starters on either offense or defense, we've picked up primarily through the draft. And that's not to say that they've been bad. On the contrary, they've been rather damn great. That's what makes Brad Holmes one of the best GMs in the NFL, is his penchant for that. But again, Lions fans don't want that. At least not in the sense that we're talking about here. They're wanting to see a sense of urgency out of Holmes by getting a guy opposite of Hutch that's on the same level as him. Like I said, a Max Crosby, a Myles Garrett, guys like that that are absolute game wreckers. Because they believe that had that happened, or if it does happen, it would be the difference for the Lions not only making, but winning a Super Bowl. Because your ability to affect the the ability to affect the passer, getting pressure on him, making him uncomfortable, that does make a difference. And there's no two ways around it. So yes, in that sense, the criticism is fair. But, as I said, it's not an entirely black and white issue. There's also a point where it is not fair. And this is why I've decided to make this episode, because people need to understand that just because you want to get pissed off at freaking Brad Holmes, just because you want to make him into the bad guy because he's not doing everything you think he could be doing, we don't have all the facts. But what facts we do have should definitely influence how you think of this situation. Because let me point this out to you. To say that Brad Holmes has not acknowledged the importance of a pass rushing element is absolutely ludicrous. Because think about it. On 3 separate occasions, Brad Holmes has added and tried to do stuff to fix or add to the pass rush. Think about it. 2022, very first pick he uses on Aiden Hutchinson, which was the number 2 overall pick. So Brad Holmes acknowledged right there and then that yes, we need to get a pass rushing element. He gets the best pass rusher in the NFL draft at the time in freaking Aiden Hutchinson, who has now turned into a top 3 edge rusher, top 5 at the bare minimum. Second, he also then, like I said earlier, he signed Marcus Davenport. Now, is that the decision? Is that the move that Lions fans that are in this category wanted? Hell no, it's not. They wanted, like I said, a Hunter. They wanted a Huff. They wanted a Young. They wanted somebody that was not only 1, better talented, but also 2, more likely to be available on a week-to-week basis. But then the third move was when we traded for Za'Darius. Brad Holmes could have just said, you know what, we're going to stick with the guys that we have. But Brad Holmes he acknowledged that yes, we need a pass rushing element. We need a pass rushing threat. And Brad Holmes himself stated, he's like, listen, at that point in the year when we traded for Za'Darius, teams are not looking to trade pass rushers. They just aren't. It's hard to get a quality pass rusher. So to say that Holmes is not trying to fix the problem or isn't aware of the problem, it's simply inaccurate. Second, of why it's not fair. However much fans want a Max Crosby or a Myles Garrett or one of the Watt brothers or any of those other top-end edge rushing guys, it's not going to happen easily, because you want to know why? Guys like that don't grow on trees. You can't just walk up to a tree like an apple tree and just pluck it right off the branch. It don't work that way. And on top of that, they sure as hell are not cheap, either in terms of the money you'd have to give them or in terms of the draft picks you'd have to trade to get them. When you think about it from that perspective, Holmes has to weigh not only the needs of the team right now, but he also has to maintain the long-term structural integrity of the roster. Again, I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook where Lions fans are like, listen, we just want a Super Bowl. And I understand the reasoning why, because we've never been to a Super Bowl. But again, here's my problem with that thought process, and here's why I agree with how the Lions have done this process. Going about it the same way the Rams did, with an absolute fire sale of every draft pick they had to go and win one Super Bowl, that's not what Holmes wants. That's not what Campbell wants, and it's not what the Lions players want. They want long-term success to be able to win Super Bowls. Again, winning one, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm not going to take that away. But why would you settle for one Super Bowl when if you play the long game right, if you be patient, if you do things the right way, which means, yes, it's going to drive you crazy, but if you do it the right way, you can have more than one. That's what Holmes, Campbell, the Lions players are trying to get us fans to understand that are in this category. I'm not one of them. But if you understand that, yes, you have to play the long game the right way, the patient way. You can't just have instant gratification. If you wait, you will finally get what you're looking for. Again, when you're trying to build something that is of a long-term sustained, successful nature, it is not something that is going to happen instantaneously. And let's just call it for what it is. Despite that, the Lions have had damn near virtual or instant success ever since they've had Holmes and Campbell in charge. I mean, for hell's bells sake, think about it. We went from 3-13-1 to 9-8 in one damn season. And then we went from that to 12-5 and got to the NFC Conference Championship game. Most teams do not make that freaking massive of a jump in 3 years. And certainly don't go to 15-2 in 4 years after starting 3-13-1. So this idea that it has to be right now, right this second, is just, again, this whole idea of instant gratification. And I understand my older Lions fans are going to call me a jerk for saying this because they're like, oh, we've been waiting for years. We've been waiting for decades. I understand, folks. I get it. It's been a long-ass time. But again, you can't say that you want to trust the process. You can't say trust Brad Holmes, trust Dan Campbell, and then when they're doing their job, get mad with the results. You can't do that. That's called hypocrisy. And again, when you take a look at how Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have done their job over the last 4 years, 3-13-1, 9-8, 12-5, 15-2. Their process, their methodology, it is a living testament that they're doing things the right way. And then the final thing about why this is not fair against Brad Holmes. And again, I'm not trying to make it sound like I am just pro Brad Holmes. I am also somewhat in the other camp. But you have to understand both sides of the argument here. The other reason why it's not fair is because, oh, that's right. When you're trying to get a top end, edge rushing talent, like a Myles Garrett, like a Max Crosby, like one of the Watt brothers, I'm sorry, it takes two to tango. Brad Holmes could be like, dude, I will give you everything I've got. If the other person on the other end of the phone call ain't willing to deal, it don't matter what we have to offer. It's not going to happen. So I'm just going to put it out there quite plainly. You can cry, moan, and just be absolutely pissed off at Brad Holmes. But if Brad Holmes tries everything he has and still the person on the other end's not willing to deal, how the hell's that Brad Holmes' fault? And I'm not saying that Brad Holmes has done that. I'm using that as a very extreme hypothetical situation. Brad Holmes could offer every draft pick we have. And if the other person still says no, that's not on Brad Holmes. He's done everything he could to get one of those guys. But again, as I said earlier, guys like that just don't grow on trees. And teams are not willing to just trade them because they realize how rare they are. That's why going through the draft makes a hell of a lot more sense. Think about it. How much did we have to give up to get Hutchinson? 1 first-round draft pick. That was it. 1. To get a guy like a Max Crosby, a Myles Garrett, you'd have to give up multiple first-round draft picks that would set you back years. Why not go through the draft and, as we've seen already this year, this draft class has got a hell of a lot of freaking good edge rushers. Why not use one of your draft picks in this draft, and go the exact same route you went with freaking Hutchinson? Because, wait a minute, correct me if I'm wrong here, how many sacks did Hutchinson have in his rookie year? Oh, that's right, he had 9.5. And that was when the defense was less talented than what it is right now. So if you pair another guy that is on Hutch's level through the draft with the talent we already have, and you still have Za'Darius, you still have DJ Reader, you still have McNeil, you still have Hutch, then what the hell are you complaining about? Again, if you're going to say let Brad cook, trust the process, then you have to stick with it. You can't just flip-flop when it fits your narrative. That's why when I see people out there saying, Brad Holmes isn't doing enough, he needs to do more. I'm sorry, do you have an insider access viewpoint to his office? Do you know what phone calls he's making, who he's talking to, how hard he's trying to do things? No, the hell you don't. Nobody does. I don't give a damn who has a supposed insider viewpoint. You're not Brad Holmes. I don't care if it's Dave Burkett. I don't care if it's Tim Twentyman. Ain't nobody Brad Holmes to the point where, I know exactly what that guy's doing as soon as he steps into his office. Brad Holmes is doing the best job that we have seen out of any GM the Lions have had since the 50s. So to get all of a sudden pissed off at the fact that, we don't like what you're doing because you're not doing it fast enough. I guarantee you this. If Brad Holmes was to hit the free agent market right now as a GM, you would have 31 freaking teams calling his ass up saying, please come to our team so that way we can have the success that you were able to do with the Detroit Lions. A team, mind you, by the way, that up until he joined us was the literal sewer pit of the NFL. And I'm saying that with all the love in the world as a Lions fan because I've endured it. Again, this is why I'm saying what I'm saying. It's not a clear-cut issue. You can't just say it's all one way or the other. So if you're going to have a problem with Brad Holmes, that's fine. That's your right. But understand you don't have all the facts. And also understand you can't all of a sudden be praising him 1 minute and then all of a sudden just because you didn't get what you want, even though we continued to have success, all of a sudden tear him down and curse his name as if he's the worst piece of, whatever that's ever lived. And I'm seeing that on places on Facebook and Twitter. And it's like, dude, how quickly have you forgotten where we were? Again, it goes back to the statement freaking that Campbell made. Oh yeah, everybody gets used to having steak, but everybody forgot what it was like when you had hamburger helper. It's like, dude, only 4 years ago, we were still the laughingstock of the NFL. Now here we are, and we're literally a Super Bowl contender. Hell yeah, you know what? We lost against the Commanders. Was it embarrassing? Hell yeah, it was. Was it humiliating? Hell yeah, it was. Does it still hurt? Oh, absolutely it does. But would I trade all of the success that we've had right now for one moment of instant gratification versus having years of success, multiple Super Bowls? There is no way in hell I would make that deal. I don't care if you were to tell me, yep, we win the Super Bowl next year, if you would just give away everything. I would say, it ain't worth it. It's not worth it. If you just stay the course, have faith, trust the process that started everything, you could have so much more. So please, I implore you Lions fans that are getting impatient, that are wanting Brad Holmes to, sell the farm. Stop and use some logic. Use some logical reasoning to understand that what Brad Holmes is doing is working. It's just not giving you what you want right this minute. And you want to know what that thought process is equivalent to? It's equivalent to when a child is throwing a temper tantrum and saying, hey, I want that Matchbox car up there, but you're telling me no, so now I'm going to throw a temper tantrum in the checkout line. As a parent, what do? You don't give the child the Matchbox car. You tell them to shut up. You tell them to sit down, or else we're going to have a conversation when we get to the car. Tell me I'm wrong. Anyway, I'm going to end this episode. It's gone on long enough. So, having said that, I just want to say thank you all for watching at another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage you all to watch the next episode. Also encourage you all to do one of these three things: like, comment, and subscribe if by chance you actually liked it, and if by chance you do subscribe. If you subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, I want to highly encourage y'all, please, make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that you guys never miss any more content I push out. Also want to highly encourage y'all, please, to share the content with your Lions friends and family members. Share here on Twitter, Facebook, wherever possible. And I also want to say this. Thank you all for watching the content. If this is your first time watching me, I hope y'all learned something from it. Hope y'all got something from it. And if it's not, and if you guys have been watching me forever, I hope the same thing as well. Hope everybody out there has something in their life that makes them happy, makes them smile. God bless, my friends. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.